In this second segment, we're going to talk about something you would not think I would include in a technical workshop, and that is the lesson length. The length of lesson is vital to how much technique you can teach, when you can teach it, and how thoroughly the student absorbs it. When I was studying, and my first two teachers were not professional pianists, I had half-hour lessons. So I was 5 years in before I ever moved to a 45-minute lesson. And you guessed it, I had no technique, I had no scales, I had no arpeggio study, none of it. And if I was going to go to college in 5 years, my Eastman teacher knew that I needed to get started on learning these skills. Now you might say, but many of my students are not going to go to college to major in music. Maybe not, and that's probably true. But they will stop studying once they hit a wall and realize that the level they are at somewhere, if they're lucky, in mid-intermediate, without the technical background, is going to affect their musicianship, is going to affect their comfort at the piano, and is certainly going to cause them to want to possibly leave piano study because they don't believe they're going to improve much more than where they are, and they are right. My move to Cary 2 years ago really taught me a lot because in spite of the years I have taught, I met a lot of parents who were in interviews with students who were coming in as transfers, and they told me some very interesting facts that I had not realized was the parent's perspective on lesson length. One parent had already interviewed 2 or 3 other teachers, and she said, you know, other teachers here seem committed to the 30-minute lesson. I see that you teach 45 minutes in hours, and I see the value of that, but the other teachers seem to feel that students can't concentrate or sit still longer than 30 minutes. Now, if you look at that statement, regardless of the age of the student, and you look at what they're doing in their regular school day, for example, a second grader is certainly spending longer than 30 minutes on their math at school. They're spending longer than 30 minutes on language arts. Yet when it comes to piano, well, they can only sit for 30 minutes. I'm not sure that I can agree that that's true. I have 6-year-olds that are taking hour lessons. I have 7 and 8-year-olds taking 45-minute lessons. And really, I put a limit in my studio on that the first year, and that's only if they are young, 5, 6 years old, do they take 30-minute lessons. Another teacher mentioned to me that 30-minute lessons were all they were willing to give, because they weren't going to teach the technique because the children don't like technique, so I'm just going to teach the pieces. I told that parent that told me that story that I totally disagreed with it. How could they know the child wasn't going to like it if they hadn't tried it yet, if they hadn't been creative with it? And that if our children continued to study without the work of technique involved in their lessons, then there's a good chance they're going to stagnate and they will want to quit. There's some amount of pride in having skill. So what we do is I realize that many times it isn't the student that really can't sit still, it's us as adults with preconceived ideas. Now in my studio, 5 and 6-year-olds, and I might stretch it to a 7-year-old who is a true beginner, may have a 30-minute lesson for 1 year and 1 year only. And what I'm going to show you in this video in a few minutes about that technique that I set up is even challenging to do it in 30 minutes at that phase. At the beginning or the summer of their second year, I insist they move to 45 minutes lessons, and I have that in my studio policy up front. I then have that 45-minute lessons can be taken to through the age of 9, and in general, I start our lessons by the age of 10. That is not to say that I don't put 6, 7, and 8-year-olds in our lessons. It depends on the child and how well they react to me when we have our interview. So I bring that up to you because I think there's several ways that we as teachers can introduce the longer lesson length in your studio if you're not already doing it. One is to grandfather in the people you have, and new people coming in, even though this is mid-year, new people coming in are under a new guideline. One creative way to do it, and sort of meet halfway, is to offer 40-minute lessons in which you can get 3 students in 2 hours, and it evens out on the 2-hour mark. That allows you 10 extra minutes to work theory and technique. But you don't need to work that theory and technique in one 10-minute swath. You can interject it between pieces, and we're going to talk about that because I think it really helps bring it in small doses into the lesson and make it more enjoyable for the student, and even incorporates it into the pieces that they are learning. Then our lessons give you the pleasure of being able to do sight reading, ear training, and a normal, regular theory amount of time each week that you're working theory that also incorporates into your lesson time for technique. So I encourage you to do that. The second thing you can do is do what I just said, grandfather the old students in, but let them know that next year, July or August, whatever your start of the new school year is, you're going to be incorporating new lesson length. And I've talked to many teachers who get nervous about that and think my parents aren't going to want to do that. Now, while I realize that there are places in the United States where cost might be a factor depending on where you live, you might want to really not assume that the parents are not going to invest. I think it's best if you give them enough notice that you're going to move to a longer lesson length, you're going to explain what you're going to do for their child and why it's important, and do that, I'd say, 3 months before you're actually going to incorporate it. You may have a few students that say, nope, if you're not going to do a half an hour, I'm going to go somewhere else. But I'd like to challenge you to think that if you've developed a good relationship with your students and parents, they're not going to want to just jump ship and go find the next teacher that will teach their child a half an hour lesson at the age of 12. In this way, you can gradually increase your lesson time and move your studio forward. I guarantee you that the results will be dramatically different in what they learn and how much they play. Because as we said at the beginning of the video, if they're not progressing to a good level by a certain age, they're going to drop piano and not want to do it. Now, in this next segment, we're going to talk about the all-important first year and what we can do to develop technique right from the primer book that you are using. So stay tuned.